What comes up must go down. The dice of fate is always rolling, and the raccoon continues to run on the hamster wheel. But when there is an all-knowing demon, a demon that can process every information there is to know in the universe, then obviously that demon is going to cheat the wheel of fortune before getting drunk off bug bloods, throwing up its emotions into the golden toilet bowl, and running away from the truth, as if its life depends on it. After all,
why so serious? Do you get it now? What is elation? Me. I am elation!
Disclaimer, despite the title, the topic of this video is pretty heavy, much like Planarcadia itself. There are mentions of characters committing suicide, dissociating, and undergoing lobotomy for the sake of happiness, so please take care if you're sensitive to these themes. There will also be spoilers about Ranpoki time and Namikoshi. Also, Aha lies as easily as they breathe, so if anything goes wrong, I blame Aha. Anyway, getting back to the all-knowing demon that got drunk and vomited into the golden toilet bowl, that was Aha in the role of Laplace Demon and Maxwell Demon. For those who have watched my Honkai detergent video, I have previously connected this concept to Nous alongside Maxwell Demon, but I didn't explain it in detail. In short, 200 years ago, Laplace posited the idea that if there is a demon that knows the location and momentum of every single particle, then that demon could calculate the past and the future from the rules of classical physics. In the modern day, the probabilistic nature of the universe and the second law of thermodynamics are considered to have disproved the existence of such a demon, but for fantasy settings, it can still exist in people's imagination. In a similar vein, Maxwell Demon is one that can manually sort every particle into two different chambers to reduce the entropy of the whole system. Both Laplace and Maxwell Demons were the inspirations for supercomputer multivac in The Last Question by Asimov, which later inspired Nous' role in Star Rail. However, Nous was not the only one who can influence probability. Way back in 2.7 with Unknowable Domain, when Polka was about to kill Herta according to Nous instant, Herta summoned a simulated version of Aha to subvert that instant by changing the value of the cosmological constant. In combination with the new reveal from Honkai Impact 3, this basically means that both Aha and Nous can control axions, the particle behind the Honkai energy. In other words, Aha steps on Nous' toes in the role of Maxwell Demon and Laplace Demon. Both can influence the flow of imaginary energy and quantum energy, albeit Nous is the actual demon, while Aha is the fictional one. Thus, Aha actually hated Nous' guts and painted Nous as a trash can for this reason. Recently, in Planarcadia lore, it was finally revealed how much the path of Elation steps on the toes of the erudition for the sake of rage baiting. The Elation path space can literally use imaginary energy to create imaginy, turning fiction into reality. Originally named as Yaoguai in Chinese, or Youkai in Japanese, the Imaginy went through a later name change by the IPC to become the Imaginy today. In Japanese mythology, Youkai is a class of supernatural beings that are usually mischievous or malevolent. Usually, they take the forms of animals, but they can be objects or humans as well, as you can see plenty in Planarcadia. A related concept is kami, which are gods or spirits that exist inside every being. An example of a divine kami would be Amaterasu and Tsukuyomi, the sun and moon gods respectively, while a non-divine kami can be the spirits of a random rock, or a ghost, or the spirit of smallpox. There is debate as to how different yokai is compared to kami, but in general terms, for Planarcadia specifically, both yokai and kami, the ruling god named Aha, have the same nature. To the in-universe path space theory, the Imaginy originated from the mass of the Elation path space and energy from wish power before coming into existence. Another lore book claims that Imaginy comes from stories, and Silver Wolf claims that the Enigmata is involved, not just the Elation. In addition, the discrete matter theory suggests that Imaginy draws matters from their surroundings to sustain their existence, and people's wish power are converted into mass for the yokai. Either way, all of these theories are likely true to an extent. After death, the yokai do collapse back into Wisp Bay, so the most likely conclusion is that fundamentally, Imagini are enigmatic stories made real by Aha through the manipulating of the imaginary or quantum energy in the Elation path space. In short, Aha's power is literally making fantasy into reality. We actually have many examples of Aha's power to turn fantasy into reality in Planarcadia. In the first place, Planarcadia can be understood as the planar projection of Arcadia, as in, the Arcadia is an illusion in the 2D plane. The imagery of the moon in the water is reused here, as Planarcadia itself is literally in the moon's projection in the water. Albeit, that moon is actually fake as well. It's actually a piece of oil-soaked paper, and Aha is doing the opposite of planar projection. Instead of projecting a 3D sphere onto a 2D plane for a circle, Aha is doing the reverse, projecting the 2D moon into a 3D world. In Sapone's quest, she was created anew every month from an artist's drawing to fulfill someone else's selfish concept of eternal love. She was supposed to die and be replaced every month, but somehow, throughout her multiple reincarnation cycles, so to speak, she gained actual sentience and managed to connect her story together, creating the collection of Sapone extracting her revenge on the guy. In a lore book, a girl accidentally manifested a copy of her crush from her wish, and this crush suspiciously hung around the ginkgo tree, likely the very same one that Avansija was standing next to. Speaking of Avansija, if you have finished all the coloring games, you will unlock the lore about the ancient history of Planarcadia before it was called Benzai Tengoku. The text itself is written in poetry form, so figurative languages were used. So some details might not be exactly like how it was described in the poems, but in general, it is confirmed that the four main characters in the age of floating Greece, the pink fox, the green frog, the blue monkey, and the star rabbit, represent the four factions present in ancient Benzai Tengoku. Out of the four, the star rabbits have been confirmed to be the Astral Express in the quest, but they likely came way later, during the war with the destruction. The full history of that is long, and I will reserve that for another video. But the short gist is that historically, ancient Benzai Tengoku was made from the floating grease of a fallen whale. This is likely based on how ambergris is sometimes called ambergris in real life, and, well, ambergris is a product of whales' intestinal system, historically used to be food or made into perfume. Anyway, either a long scion or a piece of Ouroboros died, and only the Pink Fox faction, either Remembrance or Enigmata followers, knew where all the fragments of the fallen whale was. Back then, there was no moon yet, but pearls were aplenty, likely as pieces of the fallen whale. Then, the Green Frog faction, the Abundance followers, made a wish upon Yaoshi to bless them with a tree. As a result, the tree grew on top of the corpse of the fallen whale, bringing ancient Benzai Tengoku to life. Literally. Of course, the side effect is that everyone now has a severe case of mud and cannibalism, so something like Mara. Then the Blue Monkey faction, the Elation followers, came to a rescue. The poem is coded heavily, but the gist is that they used the floating grease of the whales to craft a fake moon. This is further backed up by another lore book, which showed the investigative report of someone who actually flew to the Phantasmoon. It turned out that the Phantasmoon is nothing more than a piece of oil-soaked paper, and just as the design of the Planarcadia matrix has suggested, the Phantasmoon is nothing more than a moon in the water, flower in the mirror, a Chinese idiom denoting illusionary things, things that cannot be achieved, but also the moon card of the Enigmata, denoting the lunacy of the moon and a lie. In other words, the true nature of Planarcadia is a fake moon made real, under the power of Elation. It is actually quite comparable to the situation with Cypher and Zagreus in Amphireus. If what Aha makes real with their lies is an oil-soaked paper moon, then what Cypher made real with her lie was the sun in the Dawn device, which should have burned out 1,000 years ago. By lying about the sun, Cypher allowed Amphireus to exist for 1,000 more years, and by lying about the moon, Aha allowed Planarcadia to exist up until now, despite its status as a fantasy world in a matrix. And yes, Planarcadia also exists in a matrix, and the lake where Evanesha stood was the heart of the mandala, according to the preview information. In a way, whether by faking a sun or faking a moon, the ulterior motive of Cypher and Aha is the same: to allow their fantasy world to exist, to allow the flame chase journey to continue, even as a lie, even if the destination remains the same at the end. What comes up must go down. God does play dice. It's just that Aha's dice is a ball. This has been hinted to us long ago since year 1 of the game, as the dice for Aha in Gold and Gears is literally a ball. Aha's association with a ball, or a wheel, is further reinforced by Sparkle's trailer, in which she followed a spinning ball to Penacony. Now, in Planarcadia, it turns out that there is literally a bliss ball in the tavern containing Aha's secrets. If Noose dice is a multifaceted dice, each facet reflecting an event in the Swiss cheese model of instant, then Aha's is that a ball. While Noose can prune worlds by manipulating their probability on the dice, Aha doesn't think it's necessary, because after they had climbed the tree of existence and laughed out of nihility, the ending is always the same to them. What comes up must go down, for that is the unchanging nature of fortune. In ancient Greece, the goddess Tyche is the wheel of fortune itself, dispersing blessings of good luck to her worshippers. Later on, her Roman equivalents, Fortuna, spins a wheel or a ball in the middle of the ocean, representing a new interpretation of her as a goddess of equally good luck and bad luck. As Fortuna, she is often blindfolded, her control of the wheel indiscriminate, regardless of the identity of the recipient. Evidently, the theme of a ball or a wheel in the middle of the ocean has been turned into a Phantasmoon in a lake by Hoyo for Planarcadia, and this very imagery of Fortuna also very evidently became the inspiration for the medieval tarot card of the same meaning, the Wheel of Fortune. The one responsible for popularizing that was Boethius, who appeared as an important antagonist in the Remuria quest chain in Genshin. In real history, as he was imprisoned and about to be executed by his political enemies, Boethius wrote as such about Lady Fortuna. With an indifferent hand, she spins the wheel, and one or another number comes up lucky, while the only constant is change. Because Boethius was popular among the medieval Christians, his writing about Lady Fortuna survived even in the Christianity era of Europe, despite medieval Christianity itself vehemently rejected the existence of pagan gods like Fortuna. And probably also because they didn't want to get hit with a hefty dose of bad luck in life. As a result of Fortuna's enduring imagery in medieval Europe, she eventually got her own tarot card too. The Wheel of Fortune, albeit the humans of every class on her wheels became a cycle from humans to beasts, and then weight somehow connected the animals to the death and resurrection of the Egyptian god of life Horus, over Set. As you can see, this is quite a long way from the original depiction of Tyche and Fortuna in ancient Greece and Rome. But the thing is that Hoyo actually uses a bit of everything in this long-winded history for Planarcadia and the Elation lore. In the Phantasmoon game, every supplicant has a blank human mask, but when they actually wear it, the masks transform into beasts, exactly like how the medieval tarot card depicts the Wheel of Fortune. In other words, by wearing the mask, they have signed up to be on the literal Wheel of Fortune, which is in the shape of a cherry blossom flower in the map. As they complete the cycle, they will have to turn into, well, beasts, probably have a few fake deaths somewhere before they can return to the top of the wheel as the resurrected Horus. And this is where Aha's bias for Akivali comes in. While Nihilic's comic is a bit suspicious, it was stated in the live stream that Aha does really want to resurrect Akivali, and so they have rigged the game in our favor, all for us to complete our wheel instead of the other supplicants. In Star Rail, Lady Fortuna is not only blindfolded but also biased. There's just one small issue here. We aren't actually Akivali. According to the Not Real Noose in 3.7, we are actually the inverse to Akivali, and turning us back to Akivali would likely hinder our journey to transcend the finality. Instead, if Aha succeeds, we would repeat the footsteps of the previous failed eternal recurrence rather than breaking out of the samsara, which should be our actual goal here, according to Firefly in 3.8. Incidentally, it just so happens that in the modern day, the European Wheel of Fortune is later conflated with the Vedic Wheel of Samsara. But either way, Aha is the mastermind behind our journey so far, the god spinning the wheels of fortune that the Astral Express runs on. As the Wispe puts it, they are the hamster wheel that the raccoon runs on. And yes, that was exactly the title of my finality video, and I did laugh a lot when I got to that part. In a sense, you can see that the Astral Express is literally the ship of fools as long as we are under the machinations of the Elation. Historically, the allegory by Plato is supposed to denote how a nation run by incompetent fools would crash and burn because no one with an actual brain is running it. By the medieval time, however, the ship of fools had been tied to the wheel of fortune and reinterpreted into a completely different direction. Originally, Sebastian Brant wrote his poem of the same name to criticize the church and the society as, well, a ship of fools. On the ship, no one controls the helm of the ship because it was simultaneously driven by multiple half-men, half-donkeys, just as Plato intended. In contrast, the tarot folks ran away with the concept and tied it with Fortuna to say that no one could control the wheel because that's the wheel of God. In Star Rail, Hoyo plays around with both interpretations. In the simulated universe, there was an occurrence called the Ship of Fools, in which there was a group of fools riding inside the belly of a whale. Subsequent interactions will give you details about several masked fools, but the joke is that they steered the direction of the whale by telling jokes. And the whale doesn't really listen to them anyway. In other words, like the original allegory, no one is steering the wheel in the Ship of Fools because they're all jesters on board. They're all too busy with bread and circus. With drinking to care about the direction of the ship. Not even aha, because there is no true aha, and everyone is aha. Back to the NPC who flew to the moon, the guy also mentioned a very illuminating theory. The collective consciousness theory claims that the Phantasmoon is a manifestation of Planarcadia's wish, changing its expression depending on the mood of Planarcadia itself, and fueled by the very aptly named wish power. At the same time, at birth, the Imaginee drew their wish power from the path of Elation itself. Ergo, the master of Elation is basically just a much bigger version of Imaginee, born from the wish of everyone. The fools actually agree with me on this front, as dubious as they are. According to a popular theory in the tavern, Aha is actually an anime character. Another theory has it that Aha is everyone who laughs. Meanwhile, the history fictionologist claims that Aha is every mask of the fools stacked together. Well, this story is rather doubtful, but Sparkle in the main quest repeats pretty much the same story, just replacing the fools with the morning actors. Meanwhile, the Star Rabbit in the hidden quest suggests that Aha was actually the 108 Nameless. All these different accounts are likely true, but very obviously, none of them tells the full truth, so your mileage may vary. But either way, regardless of whose wish is whose, it is quite certain that Aha is a bigger version of Imaginee, or Youkai, currently sustained by the wish power of all the Elation Pathstriders in Star Rail. As for how Aha functions as a yokai, we have actually already got some clues from way back in Sparkle's trailer and in Sparksy's play in 4.0. In Sparkle's first Myriad and trailer, we were shown the story of an actor possessed by a mask. We don't know if this is actually true or not, but judging by the clues given to us by Sparksy in 4.0, it likely does contain quite a fair bit of truth. In the very beginning, in the first premiere of Sparkle, the actor is represented by Cherry Blossoms as she plays the role of Sparkle. The background is bright, and the mask was unresponsive, acting as a veil for her to hide herself. Her voice in the scene is soft and very normal.
It's you, my beloved mask. When I'm happy, you're smiling too. When I'm angry, you're still smiling. When I'm sad, you keep on smiling. You're like a veil that I can hide under. The one wearing the veil, that's Sparkle.
In Japanese culture, cherry blossoms represent a new beginning, but it also means ephemeral things. In the next scene, it's the 99th showing of Sparkle. Her voice is no longer soft. It's sounding quite unhinged, if happy. The mask now comes alive and perfectly reflects her own emotion.
It's you, my beloved mask. When I'm happy, you're smiling too. When I'm angry, you're screaming too. When I'm sad, you're crying too. You're like a mirror, showing my reflection. The one in the mirror, that's Sparkle.
The flowers in the background are no longer cherry blossoms with pink lotus. In Buddhism, pink lotus represents divinity, reincarnation, rebirth. But what's being reborn here? It's sparkle, the one in the mirror, the kami in the mask. Historically, kami doesn't just mean God, but also means spirits in objects such as trees, rocks, animals, etc. But in this case, as Sparksy hints to us in 4.0 and as Sparkle claims in her trailer.
What is elation? Me. I am elation!
The person saying that here is the mask, not the fool, as you can literally see the mask eating her face alive later in the trailer. The kami in the mask is literally a piece of God, the god named Aha, while the girl we are seeing is the original person before she became Sparkle, the fool separate from her mask. In 4.0, the personality of the original girl was discarded as Sparksy, regaining her own body once more, while the mask continued to control the old model, Sparkle. So it is true that Sparkle is the old model and Sparksy is the original personality, but it is also true that the one running the show has been Sparkle the mask the entire time, not the girl. In other words, both are correct. It's just that the full truth is more than Sparkle and her mask. All the masks of the fools are masks discarded by someone else, and that someone else is the god of elation and masks, Aha, who is summoned into the body of Sparkle in her trailer. In this segment, you can see that Sparkle is on a stage, surrounded by red ropes. In this segment, you can see that Sparkle is on a stage, surrounded by red ropes. The red ropes here are a reference to Shimenawa, the divine rope in Shintoism that signals the boundary between the divine and the mortal world. This was also the name of an artifact set in Genshin. According to Japanese legend, Amaterasu the sun god got into a spat with Susanoo, so she hid in a cave. The gods then danced to draw her out and then used Shimenawa to mark the boundary between Amaterasu and the cave, preventing her from going back in. This story was also utilized in Genshin, but it was Ei the storm god who hid in a cave being baited out. Per the tradition of Shintoism, the area inside Shimenawa is considered a sacred place to summon the kami. In this frame here, the actor Sparkle is inside the Shimenawa boundary, and she is the host of the ritual to summon the kami of the mask, the real Sparkle. As for the identity of the mask itself, there's an interesting reference being made her with Sparkle's mask specifically. In Japanese legend, the mask of flesh is a demon mask that can't be taken off without the blessing of the Buddha. In the modern age, the legend of the mask of flesh has been upgraded from a mask that can't be taken off to a mask that possesses the host, can't be taken off, eats the host's emotions until they become a corpse, and controls the corpse to go around seeking for a new host. This modern version is actually referenced in both Inuyasha and Naruto, and, well, you can see for yourself the design of the mask of flesh in Naruto. So yeah, that's literally the mask for the Phantasmoon game, before the supplicants wear them. You can see where this is going. The whole scene of Sparkle being offered as a sacrifice to summon a god in the Shimenawa boundary is most likely a veiled way of depicting a past Phantasmoon game that the original fool who wore the mask of Sparkle participated in. As for the result of that game, we can see how Sparkle fares in the next segment of the trailer.
It's you, my beloved mask. When I'm happy, you're screaming. When I'm angry, you're crying. When I'm sad, you're smiling. You're like a face staring at me. I'm not Sparkle. No, I am Sparkle. So, when I realized life was just a play, I wanted to leave the stage. Because off stage, there's an even bigger stage. What do you say? Who's the real Sparkle?
Here, the mask is one of a human, no longer a fox, so the cameo in the fox mask, Sparkle, is wearing the mask of a human here. In her retelling, as the mask becomes Sparkle, the actor is now dull-eyed and dead, sunken into the water. Sparkle is the cameo in the mask, not the actor. She is half alive, half dead, an illusion of the moon in the water, and she would stay an illusion up until the event of 4.0, when the original personality of the actor was discarded by Sparkle and regained her own life as Sparksy, a yokai born of people's belief about Sparkle as a live streamer. So yeah, this explanation is also the truth because it's the Aha planet, the two-faced paradise, and according to Sparkle, there have always been multiple truths, a parallax truth. But what happens after Sparkle the mask took over the actor? In her retelling, as Sparkle left the stage, everyone gasped and then disappeared. The entire town got covered in the eyes of the mask, and Sparkle got makeup on now 24/7. The implication here is that from this moment onward, the mask of Aha has taken over the fool, and as a masked fool, Sparkle has taken upon herself to spread her laughter to the rest of her world. And by laughter, I mean her coping mechanism of getting drunk and throwing up all her negative emotions into a toilet bowl so that she wouldn't have to face reality. In 4.0, this story is further integrated by Sparksy, who pretty much did the same thing with the Sparksy virus, just replacing Sparkle's masks with Sparksy's virus. In the same patch, in a way Aha's story is reflected in Sparkle and Sparksy. For the Sparksy virus specifically, Sparkle was actually patient zero. In fact, at that time, I also noted how Sparkle's design and story was heavily inspired by Kurumi from Data Live, Harley Quinn from Batman, and the Joker from the same series. Well, all of that turned out to be correct. Kurumi dress became the inspiration for her skin in Honkai 3, and Kurumi plot of killing her past selves to avoid inversing became the fight between Sparkle and Sparksy. Harley Quinn's design became even more pronounced with Sparksy's boss form. On the part of the Joker, he was already referenced by Sparkle's multiple lines asking why so serious way and her multiple choice backstory way back in Penacony, but the whole plot about her being patient zero and then spreading the mask of laughter to the rest of her world is also a direct lift from Joker's same plot with his laughing gas. Although, in Joker's original storyline, one of the victims of the laughing gas was Robin, who went on to become a later generation of Joker himself, so it would be interesting to see if our Robin would become one in a strapless storyline. Anyway, by combining everything together, we can see who Aha actually is now. Just as Sparkle has claimed in the main quest, Aha is a collection of masks, a yokai governing the path of elation, drawing their power from all the mask wearers. Fundamentally, their existence is something similar to the Masque of Flesh from Japanese legend. And similar to the legend, the true nature of the Phantasmoon is to draw wish power from the supplicants and viewers for Aha, exactly like Sparksy's game plan as a live streamer. Hence, there is the requirement for the supplicants to announce themselves and make a spectacle of things instead of the supplicants quietly assassinating any master, I mean supplicant, in the totally not Holy Grail war. Phantasmoon as a name for the game is a bit on the nose. The Chinese name means something like illusionary moon, but the English translation is a clear nod to Phantasmoon, the magical girl name of Arcuade Brunstad, the main heroine of Sekihime. In the same universe, Melty Blood also has a phenomenon called Night of Wallachia, which fakes being Arcuade and drops a false moon on his enemies. The phenomenon is actually a math equation. Every 1,000 years, Night of Wallachia manifests to run its cycle and complete the calculation, and the method he uses to manifest physically is to collect rumors and fears. In other words, there is no true Night of Wallachia, as it only exists through the information of others. By now, we're starting to see why Hoyo named the Elation's moon as Phantasmoon. It's a nod to Arcuade's crimson moon as the true moon and Night of Wallachia's false moon. In this case, the true moon is something of the fallen whale, and the false moon is the oil-soaked paper moon that Aha crafted afterwards, the current Phantasmoon we see in Planarcadia. But more than that, we can also see that Aha's existence is a combination of the Masque of Flesh legend and Night of Wallachia, as a yokai that only came into existence through the wish power of the mask wearers. Even when Sparkle is patient zero of the Sparkle virus, She is also no longer the true Sparkle now that the Sparksy has become her own being. In a similar vein, even if there was an original person who created Aha, they would be something like Sparksy, a discarded personality now that the mask itself has become a god. Like Wallachia, there is no true Aha because Sparkle is Aha, Sampo is Aha, Assad is Aha, every supplicant is Aha, and everyone is Aha. And now we know how that simulated Aha realized that they were in a simulation, because at that moment, that simulated Aha is the actual Aha, telling us to defeat them exactly like what the Masque of Sparkle told us to do in 4.0. In short, Aha is quite literally Lady Fortuna spinning the wheel. Whoever is Aha at a given moment is determined by a spin of the wheel. In the Planarcadia Myriad, Assad Pramid is Aha, and in the trailer, Sparksy is Aha. In Sparksy's character story, this point is further highlighted by Sparksy in an internet challenge. She deliberately leaked her Sparksy account information so that anyone can become Sparksy. As a result, people were led around by the mask, and the winner could only be Sparksy. In the Phantasmoon games, much like Knight of Wallachia, Aha manifests in whoever that wins because the purpose of the game itself is to collect wish power to fuel Aha. And in return for collecting the wish power, Aha grants the winner a miracle of whatever they desire, fulfilling their function as a counterfeit Laplace Demon for the fools. In the 19th century, Laplace postulated an all-knowing demon that can determine the location and momentum of every particle in the universe. By knowing literally everything in the universe, the demon can calculate all the past and future of the universe through classical mechanics, accomplishing scientific determinism. The Laplace Demon was later disproven as quantum mechanics was developed, and it turns out that God does play dice. Because of the probabilistic nature of quantum physics and the uncertainty principle, even if you know the past, you cannot calculate for certain which future will happen, because there are multiple possible futures. In the same way, even though you know the Schrödinger's cat is in the box, because the probability of the cat being dead or alive is equal, you won't know if the cat is dead or alive until you actually open the box. Hence, because there are multiple possible histories connecting between two events from the past to the future, we cannot determine which route history will actually take to get to that predetermined endpoint in the future. I have mentioned this before in the Remembrance and Finality videos, but conveniently enough, Yao Gong literally just repeated it again in 4.0 for Sunday. I did laugh a bit at that part. This is why Yao Gong asks us to not observe her fate, and why powerful observers can interfere with destiny. By playing the observer, either us or Yao Gong can accidentally collapse the wave function, opening the box and confining the present to the bad end route instead of allowing there to be multiple histories without observers. The game actually harped on this point a lot in the world quests, and Miss Dolly literally repeated it again. So I'm gonna guess that this is the plot point for Himiko classroom as well, and that specific classroom, alongside Himiko herself, never actually died for real, just stuck in a cat box up until the present. Anyway, because God does play dice, Laplace's demon is disproven in real life. However, in Star Rail fantasy setting, the joke is that the god playing dice is also the demon, so it's now alive again in two different eons. As I have mentioned before, Laplace Demon, along with the Maxwell Demon that sorts entropy, has been used to create the lore for Nous, the all-knowing machine that contains every information in the universe, sorting the timeline out with their instants and endless calculations. Therefore, Nous is the real deal. However, stepping on Nous' toes is the fake Laplace Demon, who realizes their phenomenon with literal wish power, so brute-forcing it with fantasy instead of actually doing the math. You can imagine Nous as that careful gardener who cuts off branches with a scissor after carefully considering the entire garden. Fuli is the gardener who only plants trees from seeds, and Aha as the one who wishes random branches into reality through magic, specifically the branches that Nous literally just cuts off. This overlapping in function was how the simulated Aha could overturn Nous instant back in Unknowable when Polka tried to kill Herda. For the erudition, the cosmological constant is the one true value of near zero that they will enforce no matter what from a multifaceted dice, but for the elation, the cosmological constant is a variable on a spinning ball. Sure, the value will land on near zero eventually, but Aha can keep spinning the ball to infinitely delay Nous' predetermined future. So in a way, you can say that AHA themselves is also a raccoon on their own endlessly spinning hamster wheel. In a way, you can view AHA and Nous' approach as the debate between analytical and continental philosophy. For a bit of context, analytical and continental philosophy are labels that people used for 20th century philosophers. In simplified terms, analytical philosophy believes that they could apply math logic to philosophy and that there exists an objective truth to be found that determines the world we live in, while continental philosophy believes that we cannot take out objective truths from the world and that we must consider everything in its social and historical context. For analytical philosophy, we can use the M theory of theoretical physicists as an example, even though technically speaking, theoretical physicists aren't really philosophers. As I have mentioned before in the equilibrium video, physicists generally believe that there is a unifying M theory that can reunite all four fundamental laws and quantum with gravity. This theory would describe the law, or a set of laws, governing the state of the universe, from the first singularity at Big Bang to its end. Hawking calls this set of laws the grand design, and this is also the goal of ratio in the game. Actually, Penrose took it a step further and proposed that there is a Platonic plane of pure mathematical truth beyond the physical world. In Star Rail, this pure Platonic plane of only mathematical truth is expressed as the path space, or the higher plane of existence mentioned by Batavia in Unknowable, where Nous could be found. Of course, for the erudition, the Aeons are actually all math. Nous is the pure mathematical truth in a higher plane of existence. The humans are nothing more than equations, and the universe can be simulated in a machine, a simulated universe. So, needless to say, in the Nous versus AHA debacle, Nous is the analytical camp, seeking the objective truth of the universe through pure math. On the other side of the camp, we have continental philosophy, which does not support an objective truth and does not believe that the truth can be taken outside of its societal and historical context. Even though technically, they aren't continental philosophers, an example in real life would be doctors asking for pre-existing conditions and allergy when they treat a specific illness for the patients. Obviously, if you only ask for information about that specific illness that the patients are at the hospital for, you can miss an allergy or another possible cause for the symptoms, leading to worse outcomes for the patients, or they go into anaphylactic shock and die from the allergy. Karl Marx proposed pretty much the same principle with his dialectal materialism, which considers ethnic and morality to be inseparable from their historical and social context. As an example, a jester's role in the medieval court relies on them delivering the ugly truth to the king, but the way of the delivery had to be socially adjusted, else the king takes their head. In the society of that time period, they consider the king's order to be the ethical and moral things to do, even if the command is to take the head of the jester telling people of the ugly truth. Sometimes, the objective truth, without consideration for context, can destroy the cat box, turn people into furniture, make a child cry, or trick people away from the magic of the story. And obviously, a yokai made of legends and wish power cannot be removed from the society that gave birth to it in the first place, else it would just collapse back into blocks of Wispe. This is very much the case for AHA here, as an aeon that relies on the emotions and wish of their followers to exist. Well, that's just the general divide. They sound kinda different, but it's actually only a difference in methodology. Both camps actually aim for the truth, or in the case of Nous and AHA, both want to roll the dice and manipulate the samsara cycle. They just use different types of dice to do so. In reality, both the analytical and continental camps also cross the picket fence a lot to pick up stuff from the other side and prove their own argument. So you can totally have a genius who actually follows AHA, such as Wu Qingtu with her bug drinks, and who may or may not be Sparkle. A very notable and relevant example of someone who crossed the picket fence is Wittgenstein, whose shift in ideology from early to late era caused quite a stir in his time. At the time when Wittgenstein was writing Tractatus, he thought that philosophical arguments can be resolved through a truth function, the truth tables, and math. He also believed in an objective truth that can only be reached through math and not a sleight of hand like philosophy. As a result, he actively discouraged his students from taking on a philosophy career, despite him being a professor teaching a philosophy course to the students. So early Wittgenstein was very analytical, to say the least. However, later on, when someone made a rude gesture to him, he understood the meaning and changed his mind. In philosophical investigations, late Wittgenstein argued that beyond the objective truth, the language game means that how society defines and understands something also contributes to the meaning of language. So basically, he was talking about subjective truth. This development and contrast of Wittgenstein from early to late period demonstrates exactly how someone on the analytical camp can pick up ideas and arguments of the Continental camp, and vice versa. Fundamentally, both camps look for the truth. It's just that their methods are different, and this applies for the erudition and the elation as well. The elation is formed out of its pathstriders, relying on them to make fantasy into reality, believing in a truth with two faces, a parallax truth, while the erudition puppets by its pathstriders, relying on them to cut off excess branches, effectively making reality into fantasy. In the allegory of the cave, the prisoner who escaped the cave returned to free his fellow prisoners, but as he attempted to convince them of a world beyond the cave, he was taken for a madman and killed for his trouble. The fool doth think he is wise, but the wise man knows himself to be a fool. In Buddhism, there is a very comparable concept to the Western concepts of objective truth and subjective truth, just that it was developed around 2,000 years before Wittgenstein. This concept is called the Two Truths Doctrine, which was translated in Sparkle's Eidolon as parallax truth. A closer translation would be two-faced truths, and even though the characters used are different, there is a pretty blatant connection to Aha as a two-faced god and Planarcadia as the two-faced paradise. In Mahayana Buddhism, there are two truths, a provisional truth and the ultimate truth. The provisional truth is the equivalence of the subjective truth in Western philosophy, and the material world we perceive every day is a provisional truth, an agreed-upon illusion that does not actually exist. In contrast, the ultimate truth is the equivalence of the objective truth in Western philosophy, the true nature of existence and the universe. That said, the difference is that in general, Western philosophy and math people generally believed the objective truth to be math, or, at least, can only be reached through math. In contrast, Mahayana Buddhism believes the ultimate truth to be the void itself, or emptiness, depending on the translation. Ergo, you can understand the ultimate truth to be there is no ultimate truth, or you can understand it as the material world we live in is not real, and an unknown paradise is the truth. Or you can understand it to be that the state of no ego is the truth that people should aim for to reach enlightenment. There's a bit of contention between the many Mahayana factions as to which interpretation is the truth, quite ironically. In Star Rail, the interpretation that the state of no ego is the truth is represented by the remembrance and by extension, the enigmata, as I have explained back in 3.6. Meanwhile, the ultimate truth being the void itself is very obviously the nihility, as that literally appeared in Acheron's Myriad. It was just translated as not for some reasons in English. Of course, the Western analytical theory that there is an ultimate truth is math or can only be reached through math is quite clearly the erudition. And for the elation, it represents the Continental theory that we live in a society, but at the same time, it also represents one of the Mahayana interpretations. The ultimate truth is that there is no truth, and the paradise people seek is an illusion, a planar projection of the moon in the water. Hence, people like Yu Qing Tuo can exist in between the paths, and while the erudition does not actually counter the elation despite stepping on each other's toes, the fundamental drive of the two paths are still the same, reaching the truth, in a battle between objective truth and subjective truth, a battle between the Buddhist two truths. This is in sharp contrast to the enigmata and the remembrance, both of which seek not the truth but memories and stories, representing romanticism opposing the enlightenment of nous and the elation. That's right, the elation is actually also in the enlightenment camp, same as nous. It sounds hard to believe at first, but once you have connected the dots to the analytical versus continental argument, you can see why both are effectively different branches of the Enlightenment movement. Because literally, the philosophical factions inspiring the two paths are branches of the Enlightenment movement. And just as hedonism regained prominence with the Enlightenment movement, so does nihilism and consumerism. We have known this long ago, but Sparkle and the new light cones confirmed it in 4.0 for us.
当欢愉之主攀上存在之树的高枝，他窥见真空冰冷可憎，星辰机械运转，万物意义让位于虚无。他激 继续望去，直到目睹一名婴儿落地啼哭，犹如受尽委屈，便忍不住纵声大笑。这清澈的笑声撕裂了冰冷死寂的宇宙，回荡诸界至今。很多人都以为这撕裂宇宙的笑声只是某种比喻，但很遗憾，它是真。
The origin of laughter is a grimace born of fear and intimidation. The deepest sorrow sheds no tears, just as ultimate joy and pain are one and the same. As the master of laughter spins the wheel of fortune and laughs, where did they lock away their nihility and sorrow, the human beneath the mask? To resolve the issue, we must address the other big inspiration for Aha, the Fiend with 20 masks, who is somehow translated to the man with 1,000 faces in Chinese, and that Chinese name is then translated into Protean hero in English for our simulated universe. As I have mentioned long ago, the Chinese name of Protean hero, the hero with 1,000 faces, is a reference to the mythical archetype of the hero's journey, which is the idea behind the Trailblaze. However, because the Trailblaze itself is heavily connected to the Elation, what's with all the fools running around wearing masks and the 108 nameless on Planarcadia equating to the Doros thieves in Amphireus? You can interpret the Elation as another version of the Trailblaze, albeit with extra masks. Similarly, if the Trailblaze represents the hero's journey, then it's quite easy to see that the Elation represents the trickster archetype, who can act as either the hero or the villain in the story. Oftentimes, they are shapeshifters and boundary crossers, telling of either truth or lie depending on their roles in the story. Some good examples of the trickster archetype are Loki from Norse mythology, Ea from Sumerian mythology, and the nine-tailed fox in Chinese mythology. So you can see that they can be either bad guys or good guys, and the only common theme is that they don't respect boundaries much. They can change their appearance and they will absolutely scam you. In Honkai Star Rail, Sampo acted as one for the Belobog arc, then Phantilia disguised Astayun took over for Shanzhou arc, then Sparkle was the trickster for Penacony, before we land at Amphireus with Cypher and Zagrus. In the Elation planet, all function as the tricksters, either reflecting the truth in a roundabout joke, or scamming others for their own gain. It was from the trickster archetype that eventually evolved to become the phantom thief Arsène Lupin of Maurice Leblanc, pitched against Sherlock Holmes of Doyle. This duo then promptly inspired Edogawa Rampo from across the world to create the Phantom Thief of 20 Faces, who then inspired Edogawa Conan and Kaito Kid in Detective Conan, the protagonist Joker and the Detective Akechi in Persona 5, and the antagonist Namikoshi and the Detective Akechi in Game of Laplace. It is from this remix of Edogawa Ranpo, Persona 5, and the Game of Laplace anime that Hoyo created the mystery of Planarcadia. They actually cited Persona 5 directly way back in the Penacony interview, and Catherine is an achievement in Planarcadia. Albeit because I don't know much about Persona as a franchise, I'll just leave that part to someone else, and I'll take care of the other two. Anyway, originally, 20 Faces is a phantom thief who uses non-lethal means to scare people. Think of the card gun used by Kaito Kid and Sparkle. Akechi is the detective and the main character of the series, while Namikoshi was an occasional aide and a detective to Akechi. In the original series, Namikoshi was nicknamed the Demon Detective and a man, but in the TV drama adaptation, Namikoshi was a woman. In Planarcadia, the role of the female detective aide to Akechi was taken up by Kuchiba, who is very relevant to our discussion here. In the original series, 20 Faces' real identity was never revealed, and actually, people aren't even sure that they were one person or multiple. The issue with the author is that he wrote in a mix of Kafka and Poe, so the end result is that it's rather vague and heavy on the mysticism. Instead of your average straight-laced murder mystery you would expect from Agatha Christie or Doyle, Ranpo works tend to mix in supernatural elements together with murder mystery to create a very unique atmosphere. But yes, that does violate Knox's Decalogue. And you can see where Ominiko got its tradition of double narrative between fantasy and murder mystery from. And much like Ominiko 2 endings, when the thief fell off the illusionary tower and appeared in the next serialization, people legitimately did not know if that was the thief surviving through supernatural means as a literal fiend, or if that was multiple people taking the names of the thief after the original one died. The current prevailing theory is that there were multiple people taking up the masks after the original one died, which is strikingly similar to the plot surrounding Aha and the Ship of Fools. No single person is Aha, because everyone is Aha, and the original one died or got discarded as a sorrowful mask. But more importantly, extrapolating from 20 Faces to the Herald of Death, we can see exactly how the Herald managed to circumvent the rule of no repeat participation and their own supposed execution 5 years ago. Fundamentally, like Sparksy and Aha, the Herald is most likely the mask itself possessing multiple people, and because the new supplicant being possessed is a different person from 5 years ago. Much like Sparksy coming to life out of Sparkle, the rule and execution are neatly sidestepped. And of course, Sparkle and Sparksy also know about this, as it was revealed at the end that the whole Sparksy fiasco is an orchestrated play by Sparkle to subtly point us in the right direction, for both Aha and the Herald. After you finish the main quest, you can go back to the lake map and check out all the masks. Every supplicant has received their masks, so we can actually do the process of elimination here. Our raccoon mask has 1 petal because we have announced ourselves. Sunday is the crow mask, taking after Gopher. Pearl is the shell mask, which we already saw in the Planarcadia trailer. Silver Wolf is the cat mask. Ashvale is the big wolf mask, as he is very likely to be the wolf with a broken leg, the leader of the Rangers that Sparkle mentioned in 3.7. Then, we have the Herald mask, which Evancesia specifically highlighted to be suspicious. Next to the Herald mask is a fox mask, which should be Evanesha or a sister. Either is possible. It was at this moment that Evanesha commented that everything always spirals into the abyss. And lastly, we have Sparksy mask, which is the rabbit mask with 1 petal due to the events in 4.0. In other words, none of the 6 known supplicants is the Herald, and the Herald is the suspicious mask that sneaks into the current game. Additional details about the Herald in the last game are provided in the lore book. 15 years ago, a supplicant was supposed to get Wishpower by collecting people's fear. Extrapolating from Sparksy and Aha, we can assume that the Herald is a phenomenon or a mask that reappears once the game commences, and much like Knight of Wallachia in Melty Blood, the Herald as a mask is fueled by fear. Presumably, this was why the murder happened 15 years ago, as the Herald wanted to collect fear from the class and the general populace. However, it's not necessarily true that the murder were intentional. With the Elation's theme of making fantasy into reality, there's a pretty good chance that the supplicant from 15 years ago, who wore the mask of the Herald, originally wanted to do a jump scare like in horror stories to collect said fear, but most likely, because the class and the general populace believed the murder to be real, it actually became real, and the death sticks until now, inside a cat box because people believe the students and victims to be dead. In Yalgong terms, that would be Planarcadia itself acting as a big observer, collapsing the wave function of all the victims into the dead cat as the future. Which would explain why Scott has purple blood, because it's actually a fake death. Piecing together all the clues, we can see that after the class died and enough fear was generated, the Herald as a mask actually became real, going on a rampant outside of the school, likely having taken over the personality of the supplicant from 15 years ago, much like how Sparkle the Mask took over the body of the Fool, and how the Joker once turned everyone else into himself with the laughing gas. Thus, when the original supplicant was executed, even if no one helped them fake their own death, it would still not interfere with the Herald participating in the current game. As of right now, the Herald is no longer a human but a phenomenon associated with the Phantasmoon game, fueled by the collective fear and trauma of Planarcadia, exactly like how Knight of Wallachia functions in Melty Blood. Of course, possible jump scare and accidental cat box aside, we still need to find the motivation of the original supplicant who wore the mask 15 years ago. We have vanishingly few clues about them, so a lot of the following points are rather speculative. I don't expect all of it to be correct, but generally, I do expect the Herald plot to be partially based on Game of Laplace, a little-known anime from 2015. Written as a modern adaptation of Rampo for the 50th anniversary of his death, Game of Laplace was a very underrated anime at the time. In terms of mass appeal, It has several critical issues that were deemed unacceptable by the general audience of the time. Firstly, the main character is neurodivergent, non-binary, and queer. Secondly, both couples that the story focuses on are queer. This is a nod to Rampo's own work, as he was known to have been an avid reader and contributor to Japanese queer romance, which he also wrote into his stories. To be more precise, he wrote a book called Mentally Impotent for Heterosexual Love, confessed that his first love was not a woman, and told the first love that he wanted to eat him. This happened when he was 15 years old. He also researched Western homosexual relationships, specifically one that leans more equal instead of casting one as a woman. While he did eventually marry his wife, he still could not love her and frequently cheated on her by going to gay bars. He also competed with his very close friend on who would collect more male homosexuality works from both Japan and Western countries, and after the close friend died, he finished the friend's work on homosexuality for him alone. He was also known to have defended Western authors who supported homosexuality. So yeah, it was about as obvious as it got. Of course, back in his time, which was after World War II, queerness was not considered acceptable, so Rampo still had to marry his wife that he claimed he did not love. And much like Rampo time period in World War II, the general audience was not very accepting of the queerness in the anime, even if that queerness was actually a respectful homage to the author. The guy actually admitted to have had a crush on another boy when he was young, the one he wanted to eat and whose hand he held under the table, which got translated to the schoolboy romance between the two couples, adding neurodivergence to that, and we had a bit of a powder keg. Of course, the issue did not stop there. Unlike popular murder mystery manga such as Detective Conan, the anime went the route of not describing the clues in words, but only displayed them on the screen as part of the animation. So sometimes you have to pay attention to the frames and specific designs to be able to solve these cases. In the modern day, us lore players are rather used to watching videos frame by frame to search for clues, but back in 2015, asking the general audience to accept that they need to pay attention to the animation to solve the cases was a fruitless endeavor. And lastly, the cherry on top of this is that unlike most Japanese media at the time, the anime actually questioned the system and let the audience decide on their own answers. If you're familiar with Japanese media, you can see how this is a massive deviation from the standard message of status quo and peace. For an example of how much people love the status quo, as much as I love both of these works, Code Geass, despite telling the story of a rebellion, still landed at the ending where the Britannian royalties, just a different set of them, are still in control of the empire, and the people in the ex-colonies still had to rely on their goodwill to exist as independent countries in the Commonwealth. While Death Note outright condemned Light's vigilante justice as the worst crime possible, which is obviously worse than the crimes of politicians who start wars over oil, according to intention of the authors. Despite Genshin being a Chinese game, you can see this kind of status quo bleeding into Genshin as well, mostly to appeal to the mass audience, and this is especially egregious in Inazuma. In fantasy Japan, the rebels had to concede to the rule of Raiden despite them ostensibly winning that war, and now Kokomi is hanging out with Yae just fine. So you can see how prominent the support for the status quo has been in Japanese media. As such, Game of Laplace actually posing a question against said status quo, even if it does not push the audience to go about it in a peaceful way or a non-peaceful way, it left the decision to the audience, was downright scandalous. Anyway, the point I'm trying to make is that please pay attention to the animation if you ever decide to watch that anime, and please keep an open mind on the theme of the stories. Ultimately, it's a story of social isolation, justice, and the pursuit of happiness, all of which should also be the plot of the Herald and Aha in Planarcadia. In Game of Laplace, Detective Akechi and Demon Detective Namikoshi were reinterpreted as high school students. They were best friends, and as a nod to Rampo, definitely something more. Looking at Namikoshi's design, you can kinda see where Kuchiba came from. Combined with her background as a police detective like the original Namikoshi, despite the name change, it's pretty clear that Kuchiba is supposed to be a nod to Namikoshi. To be more precise, since the Herald 15 years ago was male, Kuchiba should be the original works Namikoshi, while an unknown brother who attended Himiko's class 15 years ago should be Namikoshi from Game of Laplace. Actually, It just so happens that Namikoshi is voiced by FukuJun, whose most popular works include the Lelouch from Code Geass, Joker from Persona 5, and Shi Huangdi from Grand Order. So you can say that it's a bit of a CU joke that he is typecasted as either an emperor rebelling against fate or a phantom thief based on 20 faces. He actually appeared in the Japanese livestream for 4.0 to narrate the trailer. And in Sparksy's trailer, Sparksy made a Code Geass joke to someone who sounds suspiciously like him.
じゃあ、こういうのはどうかな。僕の作り上げる法則、黒い世界を照らすもの、暗黒性。
導き出すのは社会の変質か。
正解。
生きていたのか、波越。
どうかな。
お前には言いたいことが山ほどある。
本当に？名残惜しいけど、今はここでお別れだ。また会おう、明智君。
ビューン！二層楽園到着！皆様お待ちかね、優越の仮面をかけたヤバい演者たちのバカ騒ぎが始まる！崩壊スターレイル新生開幕！この星を沸かせる楽しいことしようぜ！
やっぱりだ。どうやら自分の立場が分かってないようだ。
まさかさっきまで喋ってたのは花火ちゃんだったのでした。
花火でも火花でも構わん。とにかく重要な仕事を任せたい。150万。それで新キャラのフォロワーを1000万にしてくれ。
仰せのままに依頼主様。それでその新キャラって？
At the very least, I would expect a character to be voiced by him in the future, and I would certainly closely monitor that character. Either way, in the anime, Namikoshi was but a schoolboy, a neurodivergent halfie suffering under horrible abuse at that. His parents actively participated in making his life hell, and at school, he was cruelly bullied by his classmates for being different. As a young kid, he did not think of fighting back until Akechi, who was originally the detective and protagonist in Ranpo work, rescued him. From then onward, the two became best friends, and most definitely something more. As two geniuses shunned by the society, they found solace and companionship with each other, working together on a program that would change the world, the Laplace Demon. As I have mentioned before, the Laplace Demon is a disproven theory about a hypothetical demon that knows everything and can control everything in the universe through classical physics. The issue is that the Laplace Demon hypothesis did not take into account quantum physics, which was only born long after. Because God does play dice, classical physics cannot perfectly predict or control the dice rolling of quantum physics. In Star Rail, both Nous and Aha function as the Laplace Demon, albeit Nous is the real one, and Aha is the fantasy version. Akechi and Namikoshi somehow managed to find a workaround to the probability of quantum physics. So they actually managed to create a formula that, if it's ever completed, would know everything and can control everything. They call this program the Dark Star, and the figure it births, once completed, is the Laplace Demon, the Fiend with 20 faces from Ranpo work. However, there is one issue. The formula predicts that for it to be completed, one of its creators must die. Which, if you think about it, does kind of make sense because it is quite common for the first leaders of revolutions to die, especially in anime. Actually, Namikoshi did not think of retaliating against his bullies and abusers until two events happened. His parents prevented Akechi from seeing him to hide their abuse, and the bullies at school wanted to beat up Akechi. Beat him up hard enough to make the news. It was at this point that the abused child broke. Frantically utilizing the incomplete Dark Star's prediction, he forced a certain future to come true through a chain reaction. He killed his parents, his bullies, and the teachers who stood by to let him be bullied, becoming the first 20 faces of legend. Deliberately crafting himself as a legend of vigilante justice for the voiceless victims, he created an entire organization, all of them killing their abusers or committing suicide in protest under the name of 20 Faces. He managed to recruit the coroner from the police force, who helped him fake his first death to create a legend, and you can kind of see how the Herald execution 15 years ago was probably bogus. And even if the execution was real, the Laplace Demon called the Herald of Death can easily outlive its original persona, for it is not a physical being, but a mimetic entity spreading from one person to another. Actually, Namikoshi was still kinda sane after he killed his parents, bullies, and teacher, but Akechi's rejection of his decision to sacrifice himself to the formula actually made him more sure that he needed to complete the formula. He kinda treated it as their shared baby, so to speak, and in a way, he believed that as long as the Laplace Demon exists, there would always be a connection between them, and Akechi would always have to look at him, even if it's the look of a detective to the villain. At the end of the show, he finally confessed the truth about his motive and chose to fall off the tower, much like the original 20 Faces. And similar to the original version, it was left a mystery as to whether he survived or not. Hasiba, the younger parallel of Akechi, hoped that Namikoshi was alive, while Akechi initially claimed that that would be too romantic to be reality. However, as the program finally completed its prediction run, Akechi smiled and said he could finally sleep, implying that yes, at least in the anime, reality is really that romantic. And you can see why Mr. Roasted Chicken picked this anime to be the reference case for Planarcadia murder. Although, for obvious reasons, Star Rail cannot actually advocate for vigilante justice or take the theme as seriously as the anime. The topic is probably going to be watered down to just school bullying, abuse, and social isolation, which we actually already saw bits and pieces of in the world quests in 4.0. This theme is probably connected to Himiko's biggest regret as well. That would certainly explain why Miss Dolly, the teacher of that class, claimed that she should have shouldered the blame in another alternate world. Probably something like a case of school bullying gone wrong, and the supplicant wearing the mask of the Herald wanted to do a jump scare to prank the class, but the fear gathering accidentally made the jump scare into an actual murder or something. The faces of the students did gain some swirly effect, very reminiscent of the Sparksy face people got after they were infected by the Sparksy virus. Kinda like how aberrations like Mercator and the chair can accidentally come into beings with people's hype, or like how the NPC accidentally made a clone of her dead crush with her own yearnings, or like how Sparksy gained her own sentience outside of Sparkle because of her fans' expectation, or like how Aha is a collective consciousness, an anime character made into reality by the wish power of their Pathstriders. In a way, by choosing to die, Namikoshi in the game of Laplace has chosen himself to be the dead cat, and Akechi to be the living cat, considering that only one of the creators needed to die to complete the demon. In the case of Planarcadia, we can expect a similar state for the students in the class, and all the murder victims as well. At the very least, the Himiko we knew seemed to be from a different timeline of Planarcadia than the one her father was in. But more than that, in the live stream, the animation with Fluffy Blue directly stated that Pom Pom also died, while Nihilix's comic claimed that Akivali died from Nanook's blast during the fight with Iron Tomb. Right at the start of 4.0, we were shown the train being blasted by someone, either a Lord Ravager or Sparkle, and this blast was verified to be real by Avansija, as she could see the timelines in her dream. She even commented that the train being blasted is meant to be, as cause and effect were kept away for too long, aligning with the parallelism to Aha blowing up the train during Swarm. Ergo, putting everything together, we are actually missing a portion of our memories again. Amphireus has actually not finished in the game's display, and the events of Planarcadia we see in 4.0 is the equivalent of Penacony in 3.8, after the reset button of the Eternal Recurrence was pressed. We are likely missing the real memories of what happened in between the Iron Tomb fight and 4.0, and our job right now is to change the timeline so that the classroom catbox would be resolved. The young Himiko would set off on her journey with the Astral Express, and Pom Pom would be alive. In other words, because we pressed the reset button, Planarcadia is now a big catbox, inside which is the Herald catbox from 15 years ago. There has been a discrete change in point of view, and we are technically not the same Trailblazer, who finished 3.7, but the Trailblazer of the next recurrence post-reset. By now, we have had many events showing that yes, they can totally do a discrete change in point of view, as we have just been shown in 3.8 that 2.3 was that discrete change. In 4.0, Sparksy again gave us more clues, as we still saw in first-person view, through the eyes of Sparksy pretending to be us. The raccoon game is another clue, as we have to trace the paths of our projections to clear the stages, literally moon in the water, and we are said moon in the water to the version of us, who finished 3.7. Also, we literally ran into another version of ourselves in the hospital, so that's pretty much a smoking gun for a loop on Planarcadia. Altogether, the two versions of us, as well as the pair of Aha and Akivali, are in a similar situations to Namikoshi and Akachi in Game of Laplace. One of us would have to be the black cat that died in the past, while the other would be the black cat who moves toward the future, beyond the sky choir twin style again. Actually, in a report about the Herald, it was stated that a mysterious giant hand actually appeared to swat down the Herald 15 years ago before disappearing. Vita and her mecha are actually confirmed to be on Planarcadia, while Sunday also has his own giant mecha form. Either of them can technically be the giant hand in the myth, albeit Sunday would have to time travel to the past for that, something that is entirely possible because we literally just traveled back to Himiko's classroom. And well, who else would be a better opponent to Aha than a guy who nearly became Aina, in the literal sense? But back to the Herald. As the old one was supposedly executed, regardless of how real that execution was, the mask itself can still return and possess the next victim, as everyone is afraid of a repeat in the current game, and the fear will make the Herald manifest for real under the wish power of the Phantasmoon. Interestingly, in addition to Arsène Lupin, Rangpo was also a big fan of Poe and based his work, The Golden Mask, on the Masque of the Red Death. The Golden Mask was a foreign diplomat, correlating to Pearl or Aventurin here, while the Red Death from Poe's work is a shoe-in for both Aha and the Herald of Death. In the Masque of the Red Death, the true identity of the Red Death is a contagious disease. It affected everyone in the region, but the nobles hid away in their castle, pretending that the disease outside did not exist. Inside the castle, Prince Prospero organized a masquerade ball, barring the Red Death from entering the castle. However, the Red Death, in physical form, managed to sneak in and kill the prince, alongside everyone else in the ball by spreading the disease. But it was also revealed that the figure who snuck into the ball did not have a body at all, as the Red Death was not a person but a disease, a concept made real. In 4.0, this got translated to Sparksy being a mimetic virus made real by her fans and spreading her disease to everyone else in a literal masquerade ball, so yeah, that was quite on the nose. However, the Red Death here is also the exact storyline with Aha being a collective consciousness made real, and it is also the plot for the Herald of Death fueled by people's fear. But who is the person that created the Herald of Death? Is it genuinely an accidental product that latched onto the face of the poor sap that was the supplicant from 15 years ago? Or is it an orchestrated plot for the Herald to win the game and kill Aha with the Red Death of fear? My guess right now is that it is the latter, and who else has the motive to kill Aha more than Aha themselves? Or to be more precise, the other phase of Aha. By now, it has been established that Aha is actually a two-faced god, running a two-faced paradise and existing from the collective wish of the fools, the multiple 20 faces inheriting the mask from Aha. However, if Aha is the master of laughter and represents all that is joy, then what happens to all the sorrow the fools keep puking every day into the golden toilet bowl? In other words, Aha has two phases, and the joyful one we have known so far is only one half of that god, one half of the two truths, split by nihilism. In physics, a vacuum is not actually a vacuum, but contains a pair of particle and antiparticle constantly engaging in a creation-annihilation reaction. However, near a black hole, one of them can fall into the black hole's event horizon, while the other can fall outside the black hole, creating Hawking radiation. This is the same event that inspired Acheron's two different states and the story of the ankle guys during Swarm. For Aha, when faced with nihilism, which in Star Rail is actually a black hole, it is said that the origin of laughter is a grimace born of fear and intimidation, and the deepest sorrow sheds no tears, just as ultimate joy and pain are one and the same. When faced with the ultimate truth of the void, much like Acheron, one half became a Synthirstu on the river and fell into nihility, while the other half has run away and has kept running away from their problem with their illusionary hedonism ever since, becoming the two faces of a god. In other words, the original person who would eventually give birth to Aha from their wish, likely another nameless, fell into a black hole and got split into two phases, the particle that laughs and the antiparticle that cries. And who else can be the antiparticle that cries other than the only man who cannot laugh, Assad Pramid? In 3.7, as he observed Phanon and the fight against Iron Tomb, all the Lord Ravagers were actually on scene and left behind notes that we can pick up. Incidentally, this also the same patch that Nihilix claimed to have resulted in our death, and Evanesha saw our train being blasted sometimes after Iron Tomb. Of course, Amphireus is actually not over yet, and Assad Pramid personally claimed that with my sense of aesthetics, work should be wrapped up quickly and surely. While tens of thousands may mourn, only I can't laugh. Incidentally, he described himself as a dice that always lands on the same number, in contrast to a Hausball in gold and gears. Of course, the smoking gun is actually his name. Assat means unreal, and Pramid means joy, drunkenness, negligence, indifference, to make a mistake, while his Chinese name means return to non-existence. In short, the guy's name is literally the non-existence of joy, or returning joy to non-existence, both of which would support the hypothesis that Assad Pramid is literally the crying phase of Aha, the mourning actor to Aha's masked fool, and he is claimed as much in the trailer.
So, what's the point in this process? Just for it to feel like a ceremony? Well, it's not like I have a right to complain about ceremonies. I mourn for worlds that can no longer laugh.
In hindsight, the crying baby that Aha observed was probably themselves and not Nanook, as I previously thought. All in all, the general gist is that the Herald as a mask is probably a creation of Assad Pramid, here to win the game and kill Aha. And the method for doing that is to possess the supplicants and become a mimetic virus like Sparksy, fueled by people's fear of the Herald themselves every Phantasmoon. And as for the motivation, Sparksy and Sparkle actually already spoiled it for us. Sparksy, the Aha parallel, wants to get rid of Sparkle because Sparkle is the unfun rationality she dislikes, while Sparkle, the Assad parallel, wants to get rid of Sparksy because they're actually neck-deep in nihilism after learning about the eternal recurrence, about the predetermined end. It's just that they constantly run away from the problem with their parallax truth and constantly get drunk before vomiting into the golden toilet bowl. In the World Quest, it's the equivalence of the lobotomy surgery pushed by Full Wish to the rest of Planarcadia. Originally, Full Wish was a survivor of the Herald murder 15 years ago, but she was deeply traumatized, to the point that she dissociated and started describing everything as funny. After experiencing significant psychological trauma, the patient developed an unknown disorder in the language center. Specific symptoms include an inability to describe negative feedback received by the self and an inability to actively express the pain perceived by the self. There were no foreign bodies or visible damage to the patient's brain. Mild, non-pathological tissue growth detected at the synesthesia beacon implant site. The cause remains unknown. Following a localized Wishbauer detection, low-frequency, undetectable imagery appeared in the anterior cingulate cortex, but hasn't significantly affected the cranial nerves yet. Testing confirms the patient can accurately describe the desires of others. Simultaneously, as the patient verbalizes these descriptions, the empathetic subject experiences intense hallucinations and loses all rationality. The mechanism behind this remains unclear, though it appears to fall under hypnotic or telepathic phenomena. For now, we'll designate the patient's unusual condition as happiness grammar. In short, for Full Wish, there were some issues with her synesthesia beacon, which was a tech spread by the IPC during Gold and Gear and may or may not be prepackaged with an experimental version of the anti-organic equation. The IPC did spread the equation through the spice trade back then. As a result of this malfunction in the beacon, an actual yokai tumor started to appear in her brain, allowing her to describe the desires of others, along with some hallucinations and loss of rationality, but it left her unable to describe her own sadness. This is the happiness grammar. In another world quest, Biqui, another survivor, was pressured into getting the lobotomy surgery that Full Wish developed to mimic her problem, and the end result is that she committed suicide, much like how Sparkle constantly does the same in her trailer. But when Aha is a god, an imaginary god fueled by people's wish for joy at that, it becomes a bit impossible to actually die even with all that power to change the future that they hold. On their part, Aha, and the piece of Aha in Sparkle's mask, really wants Akivali to stop them in the future, as this was actually repeated twice, back in Simulated Universe, and now again in 4.0. Hence, the constant play between the two phases of Sparkle, as is the constant play between the two phases of Aha, is just another way to pass the time before the end. Fundamentally, the true goal of Aha is still just a simple pursuit of happiness, by whatever means necessary, either through death or at the bottom of the bottle. Ultimately, this pursuit of happiness is also the theme of Ronpoki-Time as well. Namikoshi did all of that, even choosing to die himself so that Akechi would continue to live and look at him. Between the truth that 20 faces died and the truth that 20 faces lived on, only us, the observer of the story, can choose our own truth and open the cat box. At the end, the romantic story concludes that there isn't any hope in this world, but it is worth it to keep seeking the joy of life for another day.
你听过这样的问题吧？如果有机会让世界科技进步100年，却要牺牲一只小猫咪，你愿意吗？